cornerstone that no one knew existed, I certainly did not, is found on property in South Amherst because the contractor that demolished Lorain High owed Mr. Bender, the guy that owned the property, money and paid him off with a pickup truck or a dump truck loaded with debris from the demolition of Lorain High School. And it just so happened on the day that that pile apparently was finally dumped, that Mr. Bender's 16-year-old son Joe was home from school, loves history, I'm told, and uncovers this cornerstone, which if you haven't seen is outside in the parking lot in the back of a pickup truck, and immediately contacts the media and the school district. And that's why what you see is here before you is here. But it is even stranger than that because the find was on November the 12th, 2010, and the newspapers in that little brass box are dated November the 12th, 1914. A strange story. And you have a short history of how the first high school, which you have, I believe, a picture of in here, right here, Union High, was built about 1850, somewhere in there. Frank, do you have any better dates than that?
No.
It was not built as a high school because the first high school in Lorain, first classes were not to 1876. The first class graduated in 1879. There were 2 men, 1 woman, and I happen to have seen a picture of the woman's diploma. Her name was Abby Reed, and her name was spelled wrong. And she was the granddaughter of Lorain's first mayor, Conrad Reed. And she later became a teacher in the system. By Admiral King, one of our most illustrious graduates and the most overlooked figure of World War II, graduated from that building in 1897. I have read a biography of King, and he was coached by F.D. Ward, who at that time was the superintendent of the school district. He was coached to pass the entrance exam to the Naval Academy. By 1911, the school system was growing. Lorain was growing. The steel plant was bringing in a lot of immigrants. Lorain, the international city, was being created. And the school system began to expand to the point that that Union building, which sat at the corner of 6th and Washington, was not big enough. So they started the construction on the south portion of the building, which you see right here at the top of the page. Until Friday, we never knew when that building was ready for students to go into it. We now know because the program dedicating that building is up here on the table. And that building was occupied on February the 15th, 1913. And then construction on the balance of the building was begun. There's always interesting stories about things like this. And one of the most interesting, too, connection with Lorain High School is this. After the bids were opened, Dana, you'll appreciate this. After the bids were open and the contract was awarded, an Elyria contractor by a contracting firm, John Kaiser and Son, sued the Lorain City School Board for inappropriate bidding practices. And the school board, being smarter then than our current board, I put myself in that picture, said, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a solution. So they got a hold of the Kaiser guy and said, well, if we rebuild the project, will you remove your lawsuit? Yeah. Okay. We will rebid it. You want to guess who won the bid in the second bidding? John Kaiser and brother. So all of that rivalry that went on between Lorain and Elyria, the first portion of Lorain High School was built by an Elyria contractor. And then, if you look real close at the picture of the old Union High, you will see in the background a building. And since it had nothing to do with what we're doing today, we didn't give a picture of it in your little pass out. But I think I've got one here, unless Jim stole it. I don't think he did. Well, I'll find it while I'm talking. Or maybe I didn't bring it. Anyway, there was a building back there, Charleston Elementary School. It was destroyed in the Lorain tornado of 1924. Well, when they began construction on the north side of the building, they found that if the north side of the building was the same distance from Washington Avenue as the already completed south side, it would be too close to Charleston School. So they had to redesign, move the north portion closer to Washington Avenue. How many here went to Lorain High? Sir, did you go to Lorain High?
Yes, I did.
Well, I'm going to test your memory. And you can't answer it, Gary, because I know you know the answer. Is you walked south on the main corridors, the front part, second, third floor, it doesn't matter. When you got to where the center section joined the original south section, there was an offset. And that is how Harrison Ford, he's a movie actor, isn't he? H.E. Ford, the well-known Lorain architect of late 19th, early 20th century, figured out how they could accommodate this, hide it. I only knew what that offset was about because I read some school board minutes that talked about the problem. And it served well for as long as that high school functioned. And they got to build a school, and they were not too close to the old Charleston. And I'm sure there's other stories the high school in 1918, during the most horrible part of the early part of the 20th century, was what was known as the Spanish flu. In actuality, it started in Kansas, was taken to Europe by our troops, brought back, and the reason I find that it was called the Spanish flu was because Spain was the only country in the world that actually published anything about it in newspapers, and therefore they got blamed for it.
Task of tearing down every school that I ever went to. Yeah, I never vandalized a building while I was there, but now I have to tear them all down. It's because these things are so important to the community, and especially Lorain High. One of the things that became very important was to make sure that elements of the school were saved. So on the demolition drawings, actually, certain items were specified to be saved from the building, i.e. the yellow brick road, a certain amount of bricks, to be used in the new construction of the school, obviously pending school board approval of their use and working in that design. So we worked very hard to make sure that pieces are saved from every building, and we've been pretty successful, I would say, on all of them. The other buildings have all incorporated good pieces and parts of each of those schools. In some cases, bells, bricks, and various things that are important to those buildings. So, this is just one of those wonderful things, really happy accident, if you will, that, all of this has been recovered. And what a great glimpse back into the history that if it's put on a disc, I would recommend that all this stuff go into that new time capsule, too, and show everybody where the progression went, too. So, it's just not with, these buildings aren't allowed to be just torn down. Now, obviously, we're doing one part of it, the CM is in charge of another part of it, there are hundreds of dump trucks that are going out of these sites every day. So for anybody to stand there and literally watch every shovelful of brick or every shovelful of stone that goes in is pretty impossible. You have to rely on the superintendents that are working on the job from the construction companies, and obviously this is one of those things that had a superintendent of the construction company been watching a little more closer, or from the demo company been watching a little more closely. This may have been a little better saved, but we're very fortunate, and I agree with Jim, sometimes fate is fate, and to have it found on the date that the dedication happened, you know, it was just meant to be. So that's all I have.